Hi everybody, this is an amazing video for you about spells, a tier list for the spells in AL Limit. Here by the way you can see me deleting Ursula the Mutated with the Lightning Tornado spell, just spamming it just one after the other. But this video is going to be even more in depth. We're going to talk about DPS, time of execution of spells, which one deals the most damage. Although it's worth mentioning that some spells of course are different in terms of execution. Like Terra Inferno for example, that is damage in the center when you execute it, but there are also other spots around it of fire that can deal also damage, and also more damage the more the enemy stays there. So not everything is factored in like perfectly, although of course I made sure that the sync rate is at 100%. I try to measure accurately the execution from the time of the animation until you can actually start moving or execute another attack. Also rounded out the numbers, so it'd be rounded, not decimal numbers. So if it's above 0.5 it'd be rounded up, if it's below 0.5 it'd be rounded down. So again, there are things that won't be again 100% accurate, right? But it gives you a good indication of which spells are the best when it comes to these parameters. But there are many other things that affects of course the spell, including the range, for example. The hyper armor, if you can actually prevent projectile reaching you, if you levitate, whether enemies can actually hit you while you are in this levitated state. We've seen that in the tornado, for example, that Ursula the Mutated can hit me when I'm actually, certain attacks, yeah, but when she attacks below me, she can actually hit me. There's also some spells that increase the damage. We talk about them, but I won't actually include them as part of the DPS statistics. Again, because it depends on the weapon you are actually using. Some weapon attacks much faster, some slower, and it also depends on very much on scaling. But here actually the scaling was the same, alright? They just execute with the same scaling. So I didn't change the weapon or statistic, the attribute points, it was the same. Alright, but still there are very good performance indicators. Alright, so before we get into the tier list, I'm going to look at a few statistics. First of all, you can see the price. You can see the sync cost for each one. Don't be confused, of course, with the attribute of spirit, which is the minimum required to use the spell. Now, this is a very important thing. It needs to be factored in, of course. You only get to have, of course, one spell. Of course, you can change spell, just pause the game and change. But again, during combat and fluent combat, and how you use it and the build and the playstyle, it's very important to understand the cost of the spell. And it will also eventually will affect its usefulness, as we're going to talk in a moment. Let's take a look first at the damage. Just know that this doesn't include the one that gives you element for the weapon, and also not the healing. So we can see here that at the top we have the minimum pain. Again, this is just tested against a specific enemy robot, and this is the camp, right? So some things again might differ, depends on the type of enemy you're actually attacking. Again, this is just against the robot in the camp, alright? Keep this in mind. So minimum pain is seen the highest one, followed by a lightning tornado, ethereal beam, X-Well gun, scale blast, and you can see the rest here. Of course, it doesn't factor here the time it takes to execute. We're going to do this in a moment. And you can see that the railgun and the lightning bolt are at the bottom in terms of damage, but also you can see that the cost, right? The cost for execution is also lower. Alright, this is where the sync cost actually comes in. If you want to really factor in that in, how much damage we deal actually per single sync that we're actually spending, again, to execute the spell. So lightning tornado, as you can see, give you the highest damage per sync, followed by flame jet. Again, some of the things again do require certain execution. Some of them actually, if you don't hit all the hits, they won't actually be as effective. So I'm not counting your ease of use, or if you, I just factored in that you actually put all the hits in except for the Terra Inferno, which is just factor in a single attack, which is the one that you actually hit, although there are some around it. But usually, again, if it's a big enemy, you might get extra damage, but small enemies only gonna get, again, if you hit them with the center, just the center attack. If they move, they might get more damage, but again, I didn't factor it in. Also, there are some of them that are actually channeled, like the flame jet, so you can actually get hit while actually doing that. Again, I'm going to factor everything in the tier list, but not here. Alright, so this is the table for damage per sync. Alright, this is not DPS. Well, in the next table, before we go to the DPS, you can see the execution time. Again, the spell name, the damage, and the execution time. It's ordered by the execution time from the longest to the shortest. You can see that at the top we have the lightning tornado followed by the ethereal beam, and at the bottom we have the lightning bolt and railgun. So this is the DPS. Basically the execution time, again, roughly, I measured it in video editing, basically the time you start the attack until you can actually start moving again or execute another attack again. Now, of course, if you get interrupted, it's going to be another issue, which I'm not factoring this in. Of course, some of the problem with the longer execution ones that you can get interrupted and then you can't actually do the second one, right? Or if you are close to enemies, you can get hit, or if you are far, you can continue attacking without interruption. This is just damage per second during the execution of the skill. Another thing to understand that, of course, secondary execution will have less damage because you're going to spend sync rate in order to execute the first. Again, if you're able at all to execute the spell again, if you have enough sync rate, or maybe you got hit because you're doing a longer one, so even you won't be able because you get interrupted, not just hitting you, but because you don't have enough sync rate to activate it. Alright, just for reference, before we continue, you can actually see the spells arranged from the most expensive one, again, sync cost use, to the least one. So the most expensive one is 100 sync rate, which basically consume all your sync rate in favor of biggest explosion, in this case the minimum pain, with the least, which is the railgun, that costs only 20 sync rate. Now, another thing you need to understand is some spells, of course, takes time when you execute them until they hit the enemy, and also there are things that if you execute a skill and enemy moves, they might actually miss it. So it's really not good against moving targets, where there are some who either execute fast or follow the target. If the target moves, it's still gonna be executed. So these are all things that I factored in. Now, there also are spells we can execute and while moving, while the other ones you need to actually stay put until you finish them, kind of channeled, so you can move. So this can be another advantage, of course, because you don't need to stay put while you execute them. Although again, some of them depends also on the range. It won't be that much of a difference, but for some it might be. It doesn't have to be, by the way, channel. You can just execute it and there's an animation, you need to wait for it to finish. Basically, with channeling, you can actually stop the channeling at any given time, whether if it's just one execution, you can stop it and you need to wait for it to finish. And of course, you're more vulnerable for getting hit, and of course it affects your sync rate and therefore damage and so on. Basically, it's much more complex than that when you calculate the effectiveness of each spell, and of course it depends on playstyle and a lot of things. Another thing is that, of course, again, a cheap spell doesn't have to be bad. Sometimes you just need to deal with cheap enemy, trash enemies, and just get rid of them so you can focus on the bigger enemies. It's not really happening in boss fights, but in just, when you are kind of roaming around, it can be very useful. Sometimes you just want to use a cheap spell in order to grab the attention of a certain enemy, deal with them, like in traditional Souls game, and then they come to you, deal with them instead of dealing them as a group. I mean, rather than using a consumable to throw a stone or something, at least you're going to deal damage and get their attention. Or even if it's very annoying cheap enemies like the flies, you can just eliminate them even with one shot. So even the DPS, it's not something that you can really, be consistent with it, but, it's some indicator that I wanted to share. All these KPIs eventually lead to something that affects your performance in the game at certain situations. By saying KPIs, I mean key performance indicators. Now, I also want to add, of course, we have also spells like the one that you apply element to the weapon, like ignition, electrification, or the trailblazers oath that increase the damage of your attacks. But again, when I'm counting them in, I need to also consider what if you use, for example, a certain attack like with the hammer, where you can actually, cause a mid, for example, stun for an enemy, which allows you to deal with more damage without getting hit. And if you don't get hit, your secret is not reduced by that much. You can execute the skill or get in a situation where you'll be able to execute the skill, because if you get hit, you might be too low to execute the skill, and this will, of course, affect the damage and the DPS. Alright, so before we move to the tier list, I just wanted to share that, again, some of the information might be not super accurate, right? I try my best to make it accurate, but keep in mind there might be some deviations here. Maybe inaccuracies, maybe mistake. I did my best. Alright, let's move on. So we're going to go now for the tier list, and then after that, I'm going to share more interesting information about the spells. So this is my tier list. I'm going to quickly go over it. I'm going to show more specific information. So basically, Eternal Beam, amazing for damage. You cannot be disrupted with it, and really great all around spell. I use it a lot in my runs. Can reach far, so no problem with distance. Minimum pain, basically this is one that, you can get to 1 HP once you execute it. It costs 100, but it can eliminate bosses in just 2 taps. If you execute it right and you master it, it just makes the game a joke, basically. Yeah, it's a bit dangerous and you can get it with a follow-up. Again, if you learn how to use it, many bosses are going to be a piece of cake for you. X-Railgun is amazing, both in terms of damage and its ability to do mini-stagger and the pulsating. So you have the first attack and then the second strong attack. So it's really great if you just want to close on enemies, they don't want to react to you. You execute it, then you continue hitting the enemy. It's very, very useful, just taming enemies so they won't be that aggressive. So even if they're in the middle of attack, even mid-there, you can just let them down on the ground by this second pulse. It's great for controlling the fight. It's amazing, super powerful, super useful, and really fits various builds. The Lightning Tornado, well, you know, it just can destroy several bosses. Of course, it's very punishable, but it's basically one of the best AoEs in the game. And it's great against bosses, for example, Ursula the Mutated. Once I got there near Ursula, I know the fight is over. She can't do anything to me. Even I get hit a bit, it doesn't really matter. I'm tanky. So I can just execute it one after the other and eliminate her. Already showed a bit on my channel. If you missed it, make sure to check it out. It won't work on all bosses. Some of them can punish you easily and it will actually be useless. But again, it's a very powerful one, especially for crowd control. Well, if you have any doubts, look at this, alright? Several enemies attacking, including big ones. Just going there, activating. And even the armor that I have is not really that great here, but nonetheless, look at that. Just crazy, crazy powerful against multiple enemies. Yeah, one survived there. Yeah, it was pretty lucky. Lightning Armor, by the way, is great because it allows you to get kind of mid-stun to enemies, which is amazing and super fast, and also deal very good damage, considering, of course, the execution time. And this buys you time to do whatever you like. You can see it in a stagger, not for a short time, relatively longer time. I think 3 times as much compared to just a mini stagger. And then you can do whatever you like, continue healing, executing another skill, and of course you don't get hit a lot, so you're going to maintain higher sync rates, you can continue executing. Anyway, it's a big advantage. The railgun is just all around a fantastic one. It allows you to get rid of really small enemies that are annoying, like the flies, and focus on the bigger enemies. And again, it's cheap to use, it costs only 20. And of course the DPS is high again because the execution is super fast, considering again the damage. It's really worth it. And it's also great again with your first playthrough. Less of course in your second playthroughs. You're probably going to use it less once you have established a more powerful build that you have high spirit and you're more tanky. But overall it's a very, very good spell to have, especially if you're just doing your first playthrough. Ignition and electrification are a no-brainer. Same goes to the Blazer's Oath, although I think the Trailblazer's Oath has an advantage again because I can activate it and also increase my damage for basically everything, so also for spells. But the Trailblazer's Oath lasts less compared to the others. You can actually see it here. The Oath is actually below the HP bar, you can see the timer, and on the right you can see the yellow. This is the other one, and in the other one you can actually see that it will last, the Oath will last less compared to the other two. It's not a big one, but again it gives you an extra advantage. Of course this is an extra element as well. You might prefer it in terms of the build and situation, but basically it's all about, when you deal damage you just have so many benefits all around because of the sync rate meter. So it's really a thing that you just want to have, especially if you don't really want to go crazy with different type of spells, just want extra damage. You can see that it actually lasts a bit longer, and that's it. Yeah, in the video you can see Lightning Bolt, Missile Barrage is great. Again, I use it a lot because it has really long reach. But again, sometimes in a crampy area you can miss some of those, and if there's something that obstruct the trajectory of the missiles, you can actually miss some of them. So, I mean, it was a bit disappointing. Other than that, it was very useful for me in my first playthrough. The Spear of Judgment has a disadvantage because if you execute it and the enemy moves, you miss it, but the damage is good. Lightning Cluster is not bad. It felt like mid, but I found myself using it the least, I think, among all of the spells. But also here I find myself missing lots of attacks because enemies start moving. So even if few hits, anyway, it was a hit or miss for me a lot of times. Ethereal Orb was a bit slow to me. The damage is good, but again, it just travels too slow. Also the DPS again was among the lowest, third lowest, based on my testing. Flamejet, well, it's a problem. I mean, it's cool that you can actually move a bit slow and kind of aim and turn it around and aim towards enemies. but I find it to be very punishable. This is something that I might increase later on. I need to spend more time with it, but as of now, based on my experience, I prefer just not using it. The reach is also not that far. If you want to make the best of it, you need, of course, for the animation to finish. It's not that short. I mean, it's not like one execution and you can just continue doing something else. Kill blast is you need to put all the blasts in order to deal the most damage, and even then, again, if you miss, it's just not worth it, and the many times you're gonna miss. The DPS is relatively low and it's very punishable, and overall, again, it's hard to control during fight, especially against fast-moving enemies. Anyway, didn't like it. Terra Inferno also very lacking for me. Again, lowest DPS, especially if you miss the I mean, if you hit with the main is the lowest, but again, if you get even the extra, which in many cases I didn't, the fire doesn't last long enough to be usable, and it just, the execution time, everything just fall apart when you use it. It's supposed to be good against several enemies, but even then, it's just not worth using it. There are some better spells out there for that. I mean, I prefer that just activating the lightning tornado than using this one. I mean, just for 5 more, definitely worth it. I'm not saying there won't be a situation where you can actually benefit from it, but with my 5 playthroughs, and I play with it quite a lot in certain situations, it was disappointing. Partial reconstruction healing, come on, yeah. In most cases, you won't be using it. I mean, if you're already using a spell, unless you want to switch and heal, and no, who wants to do that? You're gonna have enough healing to last you well. I think this is just the most least one that I use. I mean, like, I use it like for a few minutes because I just didn't need to use it. I just tested it out. It just was so not useful for me. Maybe for those who really struggling, maybe it can be something that can help, but overall it's the least useful spell for me and the entire time that I play the game, and this is more than 200 hours. Yeah, so hopefully this guide helps you out, and the tier list, of course, it's subject to change, and I'm going to play more, and if something changes, I'm going to update you. But I think they give you kind of good overlook of the spells that are available and their advantages and disadvantages, with some more insightful information about, time of execution, DPS. But keep in mind, everything is super accurate. I try my best. And again, if you find this one useful, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. This helps a lot. Thanks for watching.